And that means that we are now looking at the fact that Bitcoin wars, politics, all the Trump political stuff and everybody else's political stuff, and BB and Iran and Ukraine and Russia and all the things that have been taking up the headlines, and lots of other things that have not been in the headlines, are almost halfway to 2026 through this year, which has gone by incredibly fast so far, and is now coming up on the second half, which is crazy. There you go. So, yeah. So, on the Bitcoin side of things, what is the market doing? Well, it's moving along with the probabilities as it always does. Right? That's why we trade the VEPs at Alpha Trading, because that's how you know the probabilities. Right? Probabilities of distribution and mean reversion, whether those are normal distribution or Laplace distribution. There are, of course, other distribution models, but those are the two that really matter the most these days when it comes to trading. And I know you can say, well, no, Arch works better or Arch works better. Other things work better. Yeah, I know. There's other models. Some people swear by them, but I would argue that for day trading, it's probably in your best interest, certainly in my best interest, to use normal and Laplace distribution models. At least until they're no longer the kings of the hill, which doesn't look like that's going to change anytime soon because of the nature of human beings and how the systems are built and managed and operated and all that. So, are we going to see a massive explosion in price by the end of the year, or a massive crash, or not much either way? And the answer is yes, we are going to see the asset move up, down, or sideways. How massive? Well, that all depends on the probabilities and how they move along. There certainly are high price targets, and there certainly are low price targets. And it would be naive and ignorant to think that the asset can only do one thing or the other, or can only move with extremes. You have to remember, right, the people buying massive sacks of this stuff, they don't really care if it's 100,000 or 50,000 or 200,000 or 500,000 or even 1,000,000 in many cases, because they're not going to sell it at 1,000,000 if they believe it's going to 10 and 20 million. They're not going to sell it at 10 and 20 million if they believe it's going to 100 million. And they're going to sell it at 100 million if they believe it's going to 1 billion. And you might think to yourself, well, there's no way that Bitcoin's going to go to $1 billion. Right, maybe it won't ever, but maybe it will. Right, there is the possibility. Think about it. If Bitcoin ever goes to, like if it ever makes a quantum leap in its price, like if it goes up, another 100x before the rest of the market goes up another 100x, which is very possible. It certainly can go up another 10x to get to 1,000,000 before the entire market goes up 10x, not just the crypto market, but like traditional markets and gold and everything else, right? Like stocks, gold, commodities, whatever, forex, right? If Bitcoin increases in value 10x before, say, gold does, let's say gold increases, let's say Bitcoin goes up 20x, okay, hell, 30x, make it more challenging, and Bitcoin goes up, and gold goes up in the meantime another 2 to 3x, okay, well, then Bitcoin will be close to flipping gold in value as the number one asset of all time. Maybe it will even pass it, right? Like right now, if Bitcoin were to just jump 20x in value, it would be worth more than gold, right? But it isn't, right? And the likelihood of Bitcoin just suddenly jumping up 10x and having and there being no increase in the price of gold is extremely likely. Why is it extremely unlikely? Why? Because in order to move that kind of capital, it's not like funding a little illiquid new coin, right? It's not like buying Bitcoin when it was $0 or $1 or $100 or even $1,000, right? It's already 100 grand a coin, so you need billions of dollars to move it. So it's a real asset. In fact, it's always one of the top 10 assets right now. I think it's either 4 or 5 or 6, whatever, right? In terms of market cap, it's always a toss up between like Bitcoin and Amazon and one of those other top companies. Right? There's pretty much only like I think Apple, Nvidia, and Microsoft that are really ahead of it significantly, and then gold ahead of that. So it's come a long way in 16 years, yes, but it still needs to 10x in value in terms of market cap before it's ahead of gold. Can it do it? Sure, it can do it. Is it likely to 10x in value without gold going up significantly, like even 2xing, even 1.5xing? Probably not, right? Yes, Bitcoin still has plenty of explosive days ahead of it, probably, where it will have extremely nice gains to the upside, just like it will have extremely nice gains to the downside if you're shorting, right? Like when it gets to $1 million, think about it. A 10% move is $100,000. Do you think Bitcoin won't be moving on 10% moves when it gets to $1 million? Of course it will. It does it now at 100 grand. Why wouldn't it do it then? So there will be some wild and crazy times, right? When we'll see, Biddy moving up and down hundreds of thousands of dollars if it ever reaches $1 million level or more. That will happen within a matter of days or weeks. Like once it starts, when it hits that number, 100 grand or $1 million or something, it will absolutely be, selling off 10% and then buying back 10% and then buying another 10%, be doing crazy numbers. What's up, buddy? How you doing? So keep that in mind, right? To the downside, where can it go from where it is right now? Around 100 grand and change. Well, I mean, there are legitimate targets way down, below 100 grand, like around 90 and change. And there's targets in the low 70s, and there's targets in the 50s, and even a little bit below that. Does it mean it has to hit all those targets? No. Doesn't mean it has to hit all those targets. Can it? Sure it can. Is it likely to do that? You'll never be able to guess what it is like. There are probabilities that can do that. Do the probabilities look more to the upside or the downside right now in the long term, like more than years out? I'd say long term, more than years out, looks good to the upside, but that doesn't mean it can't have it. Like, let's say, for example, it could run up to 130, 140, 150, who knows what, and then come crashing down. It might go to 70. It might go to 50. It's entirely possible. Look at what it did. Frankly, if it went up to 150 and came down to 50, that would only be a 2/3 price drop. That's nothing compared to what it did the last time when it went up to like 70 and dropped to 15. Right? That was way more than 2/3 price drop. So could it drop even lower than 50 if it goes up to 150? Yeah, obviously. It could drop down to, who knows? It could go to zero. Bitcoin's going to zero, as Dan Pena used to say, but not really. There will always be a demand for this thing as long as there are people who want some kind of monetary system that is not fully dependent on banks, even though the whales want it to be more and more tied to banks, and they're doing everything they possibly can to make it that way. The fact is, Bitcoin was made so that for people who don't have banks or don't want to use banks to have a way out of that system. And it will always have that built into the protocol, lest it be something other than what it is. Because the moment it loses that, then it isn't really Bitcoin anymore, right? The moment that the core developers say, you know what, no, we're going to make this a requirement that you can't have this stuff unless you have a bank account, and it has to be held in a bank account, then it loses an enormous portion of its appeal. I would argue it loses the overwhelming portion of its appeal, and I can see a lot of people stopping to use it basically immediately as a result, and switching to Litecoin or whatever other truly decentralized crypto there might be out there, like Cardano, right? So Bitcoin, beware of becoming too bankified. The banksters want to own you. Well, guess what? They already do. But now if they want to change your protocol to require Bitcoin to be held in bank accounts, then the rest of the people should revolt by code, by not allowing the coders to do that, right? By participating more in the core development. Remember, it's an open source code system. So if a lot of people start developing code for this, and a lot of people actually care about the protocol and want to keep it open source, then it will likely stay open source. But if fewer and fewer people care about it over time, especially as the coders get older and they've already stashed away their fortunes with all the Bitcoin they've made, and they don't really, they don't really want to work as much anymore. They don't want to look at the code anymore, and they kind of forget about it. And slowly but surely, people who work for the banks come in and start taking over bits and pieces. Oh, because they're trusted. They work for a big bank. Oh, that's good. That sounds safe and reasonable. No, it's not. If you put anybody in a bank in the core development team, that person or those people should be scrutinized, frankly, more than anyone, because they would be the ones with the most nefarious goals, banksters and government people. Because they're the ones you can really not trust when it comes to securing Bitcoin for the people. They don't want to do that. They want to secure Bitcoin for the banks. That's all they care about, right? People say, well, what are you talking about? Not all banksters are evil. Hey, listen, man, not that, just because somebody works for a bank doesn't make that person evil, but they're working for an evil entity. When I say all banks are evil, I mean on an ideological level, right? They are doing things against the interest of individuals. There's really no denying that. That is their business. They want people, and that's you and me and everybody else. They want people to be in debt. That's their whole business model is predicated on the fact that you're going to enter debt. Right? You're going to buy things you can't afford by going into debt for it. And therefore they're going to let you pay for things in payments and basically live your life in debt. Which basically means they own your stuff until you pay for it. They own your stuff. And as soon as you own it, it depreciates in value. Like literally the minute you own it. In fact, even the minute you buy it, it depreciates in value. Right? You don't even have to take it home from the store. You buy a thing, it's worth less money. Because now they're selling a newer version. It's shinier, it's newer, it's worth more money. The moment that thing is sold, it's worth less money. And on and on and on. You will never own the latest and greatest of the products. Because there will always be something newer and shinier that someone else will want and be willing to pay more money for it. And they'll also be willing to pay more money for it because the purchasing power of the dollar or the yen or the euro or whatever they're using to pay for that thing is depreciating if they're using fiat currency. Whereas if they're paying for it in Bitcoin, well, then they're giving away something that actually is probably worth more than the thing they're buying, because it tends to appreciate in value over time because there's a very limited supply of it, and that supply is actually dwindling. So yeah, keep those things in mind, please. Remember, we're almost halfway through 2025 now, which means it is time for the second half of the year in another 2 days. And that means that tomorrow, Monday, 30th of June, is the last traditional market day of the first half of the year. And on Tuesday, we start the second half of the year. So I'm sure it'll be fun times for many people in July, especially if the supply shock hits or starts to hit. All right, peace.